thank you everyone for coming to our Exploring the Metaverse presentation. I have been dreaming about the Metaverse for a very long time. I think often about all of the cool worlds that are imagined, that I could explore, all the ways that I could be somewhere else and see other things and see the world differently. And so I'm super excited to be part of a group of people who are actually thinking about how to make this real and be able to have a conversation with them today. I am Heather Hasley. I am the co-executive director of the Arizona State University Learning Futures Collaboratory. We imagine the future 3 to 5 years from now and thinking about the technologies, the pedagogies, the things in learning that are on sort of the third horizon, generational leaps, and then create today minimum viable products and proofs of concept at scale to get us there in collective action communities of this. The way this session is going to go is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, give a little bit of a two-minute spiel just like I did. And then we're going to jump right into the questions. So I'll start with my co-moderator over here, Dan Munnerly.
Thanks, Heather. And hello, everybody. I'm Dan Munnerly, and as Heather said, the co-executive director of the Learning Futures Collaboratory. The work we do in the collaboratory is very much 3 to 5 year horizon work, third horizon work. And the metaverse fits really well into that, and I'm really pleased to be here with such a great panel today who we'll get to talk to about the metaverse. So I'm just going to say a quick hello and come back to you in a few minutes after we've met everyone on the panel. So nice to meet you all.
All right, let's go with Alex.
Thanks, Heather. Great to be here. Hey, everyone. Alex Howland, founder and president of VirBELA. Founded VirBELA inside of UCSD back in 2012 through some grant funding with the idea of using virtual worlds and virtual reality to develop leadership skills and cross-cultural global leadership development. So really excited to have this event here in ASU, and thanks for having me.
Rachel, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Rachel Pohl, and I lead partnerships and workforce development for the Unity Social Impact team. For those who are not familiar with Unity, it is the world's leading platform for creating real-time and interactive content. And actually, VirBELA was made using Unity. So really excited to be here in VirBELA, seeing our software in action. But you can make virtual reality, augmented reality experiences, or any sort of immersive worlds using Unity. And in my role particularly, I'm looking at our EdTech sector, partnerships with universities, and kind of bridging the gap between learning to earning and employment. So really excited to dive in with you all today.
So let's go with Ben. Sorry, Ben.
No, that's okay. I'm glad we're here. Hi, everyone. I also work at Unity. I am a developer advocate, which means I come out and I'm a particular developer advocate for education. So I spend a lot of times with universities, high school, really anyone that's teaching or dealing with Unity that way. So obviously I do virtual visits like this, but also I'll do in-person visits after this. Hopefully all clears up, and hopefully I'll get to meet some of you in person before too long.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Robert, whose audio is working now.
Hi, yes, I'm Robert Lecamois. I'm an assistant professor at Arizona State University in the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering. I do augmented reality and virtual reality education and research, and I lead a lab called Meteor Studio.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone on the panel. We're so excited to have you. Dan, do you want to take us into our first question about the metaverse?
Sure. And before we do that, I just want to say a few words really about the metaverse and why we're focused on it. And in the Learning Futures Collaboratory that we mentioned earlier, we have a stream of work, a work stream called immersive learning. And within immersive learning, one of our focuses is really on thinking where extended reality is going in the future. and how that will manifest itself in the form of a metaverse. I mean, this is a term that lots of people have talked about for many years, and many in the room will know, and many online will know what this is. And if you don't, really, it's where extended reality converges with a persistent virtual space. Extended reality being augmented, mixed, and virtual realities, and a persistent virtual space being something you can return to, which looks the same as you left it. And that's something that we've seen emerging in the media world through films like The Matrix or Ready Player One, or if you're a little bit older, films like Tron, or books like Neuromancer or Burning Chrome from William Gibson. These are all references to interpretations of what the metaverse was imagined to be. But as we get closer to seeing VR evolve and seeing some of the maturity in online gaming, we're seeing a convergence around environments like Fortnite and Roblox, Animal Crossing, where the metaverse is starting to really reveal itself to us and really poses some important questions on really how are we going to design and build into that space. What does persistence mean? What does a space mean that never resets, has memory, and it's the same when you return to it as you left it? What is a space that is always synchronous, where you could host an event like this, a live event like this with audio and video, where we can come and go and we can return to some of the memories that we left here in the form of artifacts or videos. A space that has no capacity, no participation caps, an endless space. We're not in a lobby of 100 people. We could have as many people as we want in the space as is required. And a space that spans the digital and physical world. And we've seen a lot of augmented reality in the last 10 years really start to bridge that gap. But what does that look like when the digital world is actually persistent over the physical? And obviously, this all has to work on every device that we have. Whether it's in our pockets, on our fridges, in our TVs, on our desktops. This kind of world has to be everywhere. It has to be ubiquitous. So that's the metaverse that we're here to talk about today. And we're with probably the best group I could imagine to help us understand that, with the folks from Unity and VirBELA, and with Robert from ASU as well, to help us talk through these great challenges ahead. So I'm going to move it to the first question, Heather.
Sounds good. So the first question really is, Dan said to us, the views of the metaverse throughout history, and what it's been represented by in television and film, and what sort of the spaces that are being developed now that approximate the metaverse. I would love to hear from each of our panelists, sort of what is your view of the metaverse, and why should we care about this persistent virtual space that Dan's talking about? What we have the real world. Why do we care?
I'm happy to start us off. I don't know if you were going to call on someone specifically.
I am not a call on someone. I am a jump in as you see fit sort of human. So panelists, jump in as you see fit.
Awesome. Well, I think the key thing is that spatial computing is, it's already a part of our world today, in our life today. So we're already interacting with digital objects as a seamless part of the world, right? So there's a ton of applications already being built for folks in their kitchens and their living rooms, right? There's IKEA and Wayfair have their augmented reality app overlaying furniture in a new space. So I think it's already happening, and the key is to continue to, I think, upskill people for this this new reality and this new world, and I think doing it also in a way where there's equity and empathy and respect and opportunity for everyone, and we can do that a lot more, I think, in these scenarios.
I guess I can jump in there with my understanding and thoughts of the metaverse. So I always think of the metaverse as a virtual, I guess, universe that doesn't have to draw parallels with our own. I think it probably does have to be a shared space. I mean, there's lots of like single player games and things like that, but I definitely wouldn't consider that to be any metaverse. I think we come up with the idea of it being persistent quite often, which I think is up for debate. But having this online world that is kind of always on, it's not like a game where I can go in today and I don't know, I shoot up the wall, throw a grenade, and the room blows up. But then when we reload that game in an hour, it's going to be reset. Everything's back to perfect. So I think having that idea of consequence and this evolving world that you can change is also important to the metaverse. And I think too, when we think about VR and virtual worlds, I don't personally think it has to be within a VR headset. I think that's the way it's going. But a lot of us today are sitting in a virtual space without a headset, and it's kind of like the infancy of metaverses. And I think we got lots of examples of them already, and this is maybe why you should care. Even spaces like Minecraft, I think, is a great example where you have this infinite world essentially that users can go in, they can change, they can make it their own, and it's persistent and it's a shared environment. And it's really important that I think for the why we should care is like right now is the perfect example. When we're in a situation where we're in a global pandemic, we can't physically see each other. Having an alternative universe essentially that we can go to share thoughts, emotions, ideas, all these things is really useful to us.
As an educator, I'm thinking about this in the context of learning as well, of students. How do they best learn things? And it seems to be the case that they enjoy creating as part of their education. They enjoy being able to share their own perspectives and engage in it from more of a self perspective as opposed to just being told something. That's what we've found has increased retention. That's what we've found has increased involvement, engagement, and continued engagement in the field beyond just what we do in the classroom. And so I think creating a virtual space where students can have conversations, can have a place for their creations to thrive, for them to help build this metaverse is something that would be quite beneficial for their educational pathways. That's how I kind of see the metaverse as an opportunity, and how it fits into learning is to give this virtual space where people can really create endlessly. In physical spaces, you're kind of limited because there's a resource limitation behind a canvas of where you can put stuff. There's all kinds of different barriers in the way when you're talking about the physical world. You can't make things float. You can't make things resize, rescale the same way. And so to give people this virtual canvas that they can explore and create and view from different perspectives is something that I think would be quite nice.
I think those are great points, Robert. And some of the ways I think about the metaverse is how can these digital environments and interactions with the digital in the real world come back to benefit us in the real world, whether that's how we go to work, whether that's how we go to school and learn, how we create communities of learning. As Rachel was mentioning, how do we build empathy with people from different cultures or different regions around the world and have a better global understanding. These are some of the things that excite me about the metaverse.
Awesome. I really resonate with this idea of sparking people's imagination and allowing them to create the world around them that they want to see. I think that particularly for our learners, and I think of our learners of every age, but anybody who's a learner in any capacity to really spark that imagination, no matter what, whether you're 5 or 50, I think that the metaverse really allows for those opportunities and for us to create the changes in the spaces that we want to see in the world much faster than we could potentially change them in the physical world, right? So one thing that I think about a lot when we talk about the metaverse is that it's often seen as sort of something we're aspiring to, that it's still technically not possible. Where we've heard that there are spaces like Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, VirBELA that are these persistent virtual spaces, but they're all still disconnected. I still need to download each of these apps onto my computer. There's no easy way to move between them. What are the standards? Like, where are we now and where do we aspire to be? Is that something we want? Do we want sort of individualized spaces? Is that what we think the future will be? Will it be an interconnected space a la Ready Player One? What are we thinking in that space? And technically, what would we need to get to what the future vision is, the 5-year, the 10-year vision?
I think that like we already have those examples, like you said, like the gamified examples of the metaverse, but I think kind of everyone's dream of it is the Ready Player One, or you get so involved and wrapped up in the ideas that like you don't want to leave this space. It almost becomes better than real life in many ways, because you do have that ability to modify things, make it your own. I don't have to be a general contractor or an expert in construction to build myself a cool house in a virtual space. So I think already we're starting to see that more and more with these softwares and programs that are out there for us. And I think in terms of going more into the future is having these platforms be accessible to as many people as possible. I think we've already seen in a lot of these kind of existing metaverses that they tend to change rapidly, and the community tends to be behind a lot of that, where like again, going back to the Minecraft example, everyone, it's a fairly accessible game. Most people can play that. They kind of understand the core mechanics of it, and they can truly take it and build it into their own. Now, in that example, they're obviously limited to fairly blockish structures, but I think we've seen other examples, even like with like Second Life in the past, where users can completely create their own 3D models. They can create their own stuff. You can even bring in economies where they can sell those goods. And I think to really get to that full future vision where like everyone's in VR, this is almost like it has to become really accessible, if you ask me.
The other thing, and I think I'm reading this chat in real time as well, and folks are talking about some of the limitations that being in a virtual presence has today. I think what we need to do is not be necessarily limited to particular incarnations of what we have today, but think of the future of where, in addition to having accessibility, also having interpersonal ability, of being able to see people's facial expressions, of being able to see where people are focusing their attention or not. These sorts of interpersonal interactions as well need to be captured in this virtual space so that it is less exhausting, so that it is more of a digital twin to how we converse in real life and how we interact with one another. So I think you're nailing accessibility on the head there. It's very important to get that right. I think interpersonability as well is a very important thing. And we should look to the future of, there's a lot of recent research and different kind of technologies that would be able to capture and reproduce facial animations, and there's a lot of research that is going out to see what is it inside of these virtual spaces that makes us so exhausted, and how can we study that. And really the exciting thing about creating this metaverse is that it can become a test bed for that and continuously evolve, which is something beautiful about virtual spaces as well. Virtual spaces has that ability that you can have versioning that improves over time, as opposed to building an architectural building that you're a little bit more limited in terms of kind of the versioning of a building and a space. That's just my 2 cents on the matter.
I'll just add that it's a big task, right? We're trying to replicate something that's pretty amazing, and that's the real world. So in a lot of ways, we need to represent enough of the real world that people understand and have a sense of place and kind of know what to do in the space. But we really need to think what can be done in these virtual worlds, virtual environments that can't be done in the real world. And I think that's where a lot of the innovation will take place. It's going to take time. It's going to take experimentation. I think there's lots of benefits to having many people working on it in different areas and different applications. I know for us, one area that we're pursuing and do ourselves is we run businesses in these virtual worlds. Our business has grown from 25 people to 100 people in the last 90 days, and I'm not sure we would have been able to build the team that quickly if we were in a brick and mortar setting. And it allows us to find talent who are located all over the country or the world, people who have real interest and align with values quite quickly. We can quickly get people up to speed. And it takes a little time to get a sense of place and really being present in these environments. So it feels very much like the real world in terms of interacting with your colleagues. And it allows for much more serendipitous, collisions and connections that happen in the real world that don't happen on things like conference calls.
Yeah, and I'll just, I think, build on that, which is how can we augment these virtual experiences with in-person experiences and improve? So I think one example as a result of COVID is the use of Unity simulation to actually simulate the spread of COVID within certain spaces, and that we were able to use that as a VR training tool and deploy that to hospitals really quickly to train their healthcare professionals in addition to kind of see the spread of COVID. Or the fact that students are able to retain, upwards of 40% more learning in VR than on standard video. So while it feels still very nascent, I think access is a huge component of this. As Heather has said before to me, there wouldn't be enough Oculus headsets to outfit all of the ASU students, right? So how do we account for accessibility and access to hardware, for example? But there definitely are at least nascent cases showing the success of learning in VR and the ability to augment in-person experiences in addition to recreate new worlds and new experiences as a result.
Building on top of that idea of the technical aspect behind it too, I think there's a lot of these spaces need to be accessible in terms of the technical side of things as well. If we build these immersive, crazy spaces that are, maybe they're high fidelity, they look amazing, they have all these great benefits to them, but we lock them behind, you need a $3,000 computer, another $1,000 headset. It really limits the space, and I think that's a big part of getting to this ideal metaverse is having it on technology that communicates across platforms, and we're definitely already starting to see that now. A lot of the main kind of big AAA games are doing it at this point, where even 4 years ago, if I was an Xbox kid and I wanted to play with my PS4 buddies, it was never a thing. I couldn't do it. And now if you go and you play something like Fortnite, it doesn't matter if it's, me on my big fancy gaming PC or it's my little cousin who's playing on his mom's phone. We can have this shared experience that we all need to be able to access without having a huge paywall in front of us.
Okay, so what I've heard in the last couple of comments really has been a lot of mention of technical skills, and it really makes me start to think around the skill sets required to build ubiquitous experiences that we just heard from Ben, and real 3D software environments that actually go beyond what we're doing right now, which is very much replicating what we've always done in events like these, panel sessions, auditorium type venues. And it makes me think of some of the writings. Marshall McLuhan always wrote that every new medium will incorporate the one that went before it becomes something else. And what we've done right now is replicate what was there before. So what lies ahead really is I see some real opportunity in some learning from the gaming space and learning from Fortnite and Roblox on what the next generation are creating as gameful, playful, social learning spaces. And I was watching a game just recently called VR Hands. It's a Roblox game, and it's an obstacle course in a game that you can play on a computer where your character has to run and jump and leap over chasms and work your way through an obstacle course. But the interesting thing about the game was if you play it on your keyboard, you use your keyboard controls. But if you play it in virtual reality, you become a giant in that game. And because you have big hands, you can help people bridge gaps so they can walk and jump across gaps that they can't jump out on in the desktop game. And what you've got there is a really creative environment that bridges systems, bridges technologies, and creates a new type of environment, a new game space. And that that space, I think, is really for me where we start to see the future of the metaverse. But the skills that are required to build that and the thinking, I'm really interested in for our next set of questions. And that really is to ask the group, what skills do people need to build into the metaverse? How are we going to develop that talent? Where's talent going to come from? And where's the imagination that comes with it going to come from? So I'll just open that up as the next set of questions.
I can start with what skills I think are really important. First, there's the technical side of it, but I think even more important is kind of the soft skills around creativity and collaboration and communication. So when we look at STEAM, I think there's a bold emphasis on the A, or arts. Without the arts, we lose focus on the creativity. And creativity brings those required skills for innovation, like empathy and resilience and divergent thinking. So when we look at the skills required for this new world, I just want to put an emphasis on arts and creativity in addition to the technical components, because there's so much that without that focus on the arts, we may not be very different than AI-driven robots in the next generation.
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump onto that point. So as I mentioned before, I'm a professor in the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering here at Arizona State University. We hire artists as faculty, we hire engineers as faculty, we hire philosophers as faculty, we hire science fiction writers as faculty, and the students that we get through our digital culture major, as you might expect, end up going through a set of coursework that's actually quite varied and is intent on understanding the culture behind this technology adoption, the needs of representing all voices, projecting all voices outwards, as well as the technical skill and the artistry to actually put these to practice. And so this comes out in my augmented reality and virtual reality course as well, where you end up seeing students that you wouldn't traditionally see in kind of a computer science curriculum, but still being able to program and create really deep, meaningful works, as well as being sensitive to cultural themes, gender equity, racial inequity, and being able to kind of address these kinds of concerns through their practice as well. So being able to have a space for students to create and to have them be aware of these social themes that are going on inside of the different curricular offerings is important. But I think even beyond that, thinking through how students can be creating inside of their majors. So what does a career inside of chemistry look like? What do people end up doing inside of that career? Having students build representationally what things will look like in the future will empower them with that agency to really be looking inside and outside of themselves to see where they fit into this world, where their education fits into this world, and what they can do with that in the future. So I think that the skills necessary are those that would allow them to express their thoughts, allow them to connect with others, allow them to connect with their futures.
Yeah, I think I can kind of smear that idea that there's a lot of obvious technical skills. Yes, we're going to need a lot of programmers and artists and things to get these softwares up and running. But I think the creative side is where it gets more interesting, because we need people that aren't just trying to mirror our real universe. We want them to go and create new fun experiences that you can't do just in real life. We need to have those experiences that are like mind-blowing to get people in and trying these new virtual worlds. And I think even within these spaces, there's a lot of potential for I guess real world jobs today to have a second meaning within these metaverses. So like I was wandering around earlier and like I came across the online I guess it was like the concert area outside where like it's possible that you could be a musician, you could be a metaverse rock star essentially, where you get your start there and you don't have to just pertain this to real life. So I think to make it work, yes, we need the technical know-how and to actually build these worlds initially, but we also need skills inside these worlds that make people want to come back and experience more.
Great points. I can't think of a discipline that shouldn't be involved in creating the metaverse.
Yeah, I think when I think of the metaverse, I think creatives, like, but I also think of the humanities. I'm watching the chat roll by, right? And I'm watching people talk about representation of themselves in these spaces. I'm watching people talk about the way the social norms, what's norm in these spaces versus what's norm in our real lives, right? Like, I think I saw a whole conversation go by about how we wouldn't necessarily turn to the person next to us and say some of the things that we say in chat during conferences because they might think you're crazy, right? But you can say them in chat and you can find your community because your community is innately bigger, and you can find people who resonate with you. And so I think that when we're thinking about the skill sets that come into these future spaces, I think we need anthropologists. I think we need people in the humanities, in the social sciences, in psychology, in all of these spaces to be creating. We need storytellers. We need people who can tell the narrative of where we're going. So it's not, for me, I think that it's beyond the creatives, it's beyond the technical people. It's also all of the things that surround it. It's going to need things that society needs to function already, because it will be its own version of a society. And I think that raises a lot of questions, right? So, you know, who governs these new societies? Is it the corporations who found them? Is it is it industry? Is it some governmental body? Are we bound by the same rules that we are in the real world? How do we make these spaces more inclusive? How do we make sure that can represent themselves in a way that feels authentic? I'm really interested to sort of go down this road of how we actually sort of make this society a better society in some ways, or is it just reflecting and bringing in all of the things that we don't love about our current society?
It's a very difficult discussion because these virtual spaces and online spaces in general, not even just these immersive spaces, but also non-immersive virtual spaces, lend themselves to some forms of toxicity due to physical spatial anonymity. Even if you had your name attached to your head, the freedom of the virtual world also means that you feel a little bit less connected to your the consequences of your actions. And this is being studied actively by several sociologists and several ethicists, several philosophers. And I think we should be mindful to that and be aware of what they're writing about these subjects, and see where we can do better.
Yeah,
governance is a hard question.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, I think it's really an important point to just recognize that we're all human. We all have biases given the systems that we've been born into. And I think there's a huge opportunity as we look to the metaverse to do some introspection and question these biases and see how we can reimagine the future together. Questions around ownership, which is a very Western sort of concept and term. And one of the really critical pieces is to involve everyone and give them the access to the skills and the tools to be able to build their own realities and tell their stories, right? So today, if you look at particularly, I think in the gaming industry, it is very homogenous. So how do we give people the tools to be able to tell their stories, to be able to showcase and have their voice heard? And there's a ton of potential and opportunity to do that in the virtual space. And to create new visions of themselves and their countries.
Yeah, I think like most tools, there's positives and negatives in terms of what can be done from a cultural perspective. So certainly agree in some of the points Robert mentioned, and some of the studies are out there. But what I also find with the virtual worlds and the benefits of the avatar is it actually provides some level of psychological safety. So we hear from a lot of introverts and people who might not typically feel comfortable speaking up or taking a leadership role in person, feel comfortable in these environments. We've worked with healthcare professionals where we've had nurses say, I've never felt comfortable, speaking up like I am right now to doctors. I don't know why I feel comfortable now, but I feel comfortable now. So I think there's pros and cons that need to be balanced out. I've also seen some informal groups form within organizations and take on some power. So EXP Realty is a company that's grown from 900 agents to over 31,000 agents, and in a virtual world, no brick and mortar, over now a $1 billion company. And many self-forming groups have formed in their universe, including EXP Power Girls, which is a self-forming leadership group of women in real estate, and then one EXP, which is a diversity and inclusion group that self-formed and now has hundreds of members and has gotten enough power to the point where the leader of that group has been named onto the board of the NASDAQ publicly traded company. So I think there's pros and cons to keep an eye out on, and maybe like our country, the people should have governance of their world.
There's one other really amazing example that I want to bring up. It's I think one of the most inspirational examples that I've come across, which is an organization. It's a nonprofit based in Afghanistan called Code to Inspire. And it's the only program in the country that's teaching women and girls how to code, and specifically around game development. And one of the games that they have developed, Afghan Girl, Hero Girl, showcases a woman in position of power, like standing up to her peers and her parents. In addition, they have a few other games that the girls have developed that showcase an Afghanistan 2.0 with fields of saffron instead of the war-torn country that they currently have today. So it's just an incredible, inspiring example of not only the economic opportunity that it has been brought as a result of learning those technical skills, but also the ability to reimagine your situation.
Awesome. I think that seeing the chat go by and a lot of the things that you all have been discussing really tie to sort of what will this new virtual world look like, and how will it change, intersect with our current world. Is it one world, many ways to connect? Is it many worlds? We know Second Life had a lovely failure when it first started, and it didn't really necessarily change very much in the way we connect. Maybe opened some people's eyes, but it was a limited number. So I'm interested to know from the panel how you think everything we do will change. So Alex, you've created VirBELA to change the way we work together as a solution to a real estate company, right? Needing a virtual real estate office and then holding events in these spaces. So how will our work change and evolve over time? How will it change education? Robert, you've touched on this in the way that your students engage. What are the types of spaces and the way people learn? How will that change? And how will it change our interpersonal relationships, the way we engage with our people in our real life, in our sort of what we would call the physical world? I'm just wondering what the panelists think about how things are going to change over the next few years.
I think for education, I've even worked already with one where having these virtual worlds can really allow us to get things done faster and be repetitive or get over like a lot of hard life challenges. So one I was actually working on, I was with a university whose main focus was medical, and they had medical students training to be doctors, and they would do a cadaver. So they would actually need to go, they'd have someone donate their body to science essentially, and they would go and try to find what happened, almost like an autopsy, and they would look over the actual physical human body. And it's not cheap, and it's not easy in terms of legal to do that. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to get someone, even if they're donating their body, there's a lot of fees associated with that. So we were able to take something like the HoloLens and augment that into a virtual body. And at this point, like it's not at this point, it's not to the same level. I wouldn't want a doctor who's only looked at a virtual body, operating on me personally at this point. But it can introduce us to a lot of things and can get those students in the actual space and doing what they need to do a lot faster. And it's a lot cheaper for these education institutes to get to that point as well. So let's say if you are training for a surgery and you're doing it on a live person, you don't want to mess it up. That might be the end of that guy. But in this virtual space, we have the ability to afford to mess up and make mistakes and even encourage people to make more mistakes and learn that way. And I think that's a really powerful thing for the education side.
I can speak concretely about some of the experiences that we're building as well. Some of the experiences the students are building as well. For planetary science, for example, where you're trying to understand planetary geology of a particular set of data that's coming back from orbital satellites that are orbiting around Mars. And how do we understand about the history of Mars and its geomorphology and whether it was warm and wet from the spectral data? So there are classes that teach this, but we can actually now put the students through virtual reality headsets or through their augmented reality on their phones and be able to have them put on the surface of these planets and do the field geology as though they were exploring these different planets. And the students get really excited about this, both conceptually and in implementation, of being able to actually viscerally understand what's going on. It's not just spreadsheets now, it's not just lines on a chart, but they actually get to see how and why things are the way they are. What people typically do in these fields is they will do field geology on Earth as well. They'll go to different sites, they'll pick up different rocks. And so that's been a very wonderful way for Earth science and planetary science to progress. But being able to do that virtually now extends the accessibility of those types of interactions, extends the depth at which you can go because you're not limited to only where you can geographically travel, but now you can virtually travel to these spaces. So these are some of the kind of concrete ways that you can build these educational futures. Now, where everything has been limited and how I've been seeing things is in the creation pipeline of being able to actually create for your curriculum. And so I'm not entirely sure what to do there. And I think VirBELA is a nice progress towards that point. I think Second Life was a great progress towards that point. Roblox, and I mean, there's countless many others throughout history that people are creating these development environments. Unity is a great building platform for that as well. But the thing is, how do we put these in the lenses and hands of educators and of students themselves to build and create in these spaces? I think that's going to be kind of the grand challenge. And that's why these things are, I would say, not fully implemented, but always kind of there's a promise, an advent of something coming next, right?
Building on top of that too, I think it enables us to have access to people we would never normally have access to. So like I can be up here and I'm coming to you from Canada, but I'm presenting at an ASU down in Arizona event, right? And you can have that where maybe there is an expert in your field that, he lives halfway around the world, somewhere that you couldn't afford to get to, or maybe you can't travel there because of restrictions. Now we can all get together in this virtual space and have access to one another, which is something that's still a relatively big struggle, even with things like with Zoom or Facebook or anything else. Having that easy access to virtually anyone on the planet could be a really great thing for everyone.
That was certainly a big component in the vision of VirBELA, and I was taking some online classes and found them just very, very passive. And I didn't get the opportunity to be in a community of learners like I did in my brick and mortar classes. So saw virtual world, virtual reality as a place to come together and have real conversation with people, not just listen one direction, whether it's before or after a class, or a presentation, connecting with my peers, opportunity to build simulations, whether it's to build leadership and teaming skills, as well as more of the hard sciences or understanding geography in different parts of the world. So I think there's a ton of opportunity to be creative. I think there's a ton of work to do. you, and it will take some time. There'll be many imperfections along the way, certainly including the ones here in VirBELA, but it's a work in progress. And if you lean in and experiment, you learn a lot, and hopefully continue to iterate, and we move forward as a global society.
Yeah, I think that gets us to Dan. Did you want to? Were you going to
I
say
was
something?
just going to say, I think we're reaching the end of our questions, Heather, and I just wondered if we wanted to close this with any open questions from the audience, or
Yeah, that was the next step that I would throw it to. Is we've had a really lively chat in the chat. I think this is the most lively chat I think I've ever seen in any virtual platform. The metaverse clearly stirs up a lot in good, bad, ugly, beautiful, amazing, inspiring, as well as some of the fears and challenges. So I'd love to hear from the audience questions for the panel. You can use your raise hand button, and then we can unmute you, and you can unmute yourself to ask a question. You can also type it in the chat box. Some people would prefer not to speak out loud, so happy to take questions from the chat box. All right, so we got a question is, I'd love suggestions for people who want to experiment in these spaces but have no funding. What does the panel suggest for ways that people can experiment in these spaces? And I think this also ties to sort of access to these types of experiences right now. They're mostly behind paywalls. What are opportunities for people in these spaces?
I'll just jump in with a shameless plug for Unity, which is that it is a totally free software. We have a personal edition, we have a student edition, we have a university edition, basically where we give our professional version of our license for free for educational purposes. So there is no barrier to getting started with Unity. In addition, we offer all of our learning content available for free. On our website, we have a learning management system that we built. There's about 700,000 learners on there per month learning different skills around interactive development, C#, art and design, and it's a totally open platform. So in terms of getting started, I think there's a lot of great resources to help you get started there.
I can vouch for that. With Unity, showing students what they're capable of in a small workshop is usually all that it takes. They typically teach themselves quite deeply along the lines of what they want to do. And usually it's in terms of building different games, but it can be building other things as well. And so if you find yourself wanting to learn more, it's actually, Unity has been a game changer in kind of breaking the barrier to entry and making it much, it's free, which makes it incredibly affordable and accessible for your device, for your computers, so you can program in these spaces. And students have taken advantage of that, I can say. It's not the only game in town, of course. There are several other platforms that now, since Unity has changed the game, others have also competed as well. But there are other game engines out there and other development streams out there. Somebody mentioned Amazon Sumerian as well. So there are other platforms where people can be creative, and there's just endless YouTube tutorials to learn from to get started.
This is something Dan and I always talk about is, the next generation is already programming on Roblox, and Roblox, to enter is technically free, right? You can go in, you can play, you can get on these games and you can engage. I mean, and you can start to create, and lots and lots and lots of kids are in these platforms. And even if you look at the web, frame.io is one where you can meet, and there's lots of these platforms right now that you can go in for a limited capacity and start to experiment in these spaces. Obviously, you know, being at ASU, when we think about scale, that's when you start to get beyond sort of the limitations of, you know, a free version of something. But I think that at least for experimentation, playing, learning what's possible, lots of these platforms offer trials and or are free up to a certain number of users. So I would, you know, I think at some point Dan downloaded like 36 or 37 different platforms just for virtual meetings and virtual events, just to see what they all had to offer and see and try things in every single one of them and look at their affordances.
And I'm glad you mentioned Roblox along the way, because you've only got to look into the user base of Roblox and get a sense of where things are going. You know, you think about Second Life, you know, with a user base of about 1 million people. At its peak was 1 million. Roblox is way past 100 million. Fortnite is beyond that. The monthly usage numbers are in there, you know, at a phenomenal level. And when that number of people use a product that has an open development platform, what you start to see is some genuine original creativity. So a lot of the games that come out of Roblox, I find, are now starting to really test the edges of what you can do within a game space. And I think that for me is really where, you know, where the opportunities lie, because of the scalable environment and the way the code translates from Roblox to Unity to Unreal to whatever you want. You know, it's a great primer before you get to your C# course on you know, Unity Learn, which I'm kind of 3/4 of my way through now, enjoying immensely. But Roblox was great, you know, grounding for that. But more importantly, it's a great insight into where we're heading and what massive use does, what a massive user base can do when they come together in one platform to create a game and play the game, and then to create in the game. And that's the thing that's really happening, I think, in that space, is the development tools that sat outside in Roblox Studio are now being embedded in the game, so that you, like Minecraft, you build in game. And I think that's really where, you know, some of this metaverse is heading, is in-game, in-world development tools in an open, ubiquitous platform. And I think that what you're seeing in Roblox is really the emergence of that. So very excited about that space and what it offers to people. I think we're down to our last 5 minutes, Heather. I don't know if we were.
We are. So I think we have some more questions from the audience. I think that, but I think that we are at that point of sort of wrapping up. So do you think we have time for one more, Dan?
I think so. I can see a question.
I saw Robin standing up. She had her hand raised in the audience. Robin, did you want to stand up and unmute and ask us your question?
Hi. Actually, I think I'm going to defer since we only have time. Jennifer raised a question in the chat that I would love to hear the answer to. And so she asked, what would be some ways that we can bridge the gaps with the techs that we're talking about in rural or low socioeconomic areas where tech literacy is not as high and not as available?
I think that's a fantastic question. Being that I've been teaching at ASU, when you teach freshmen, for example, in digital culture, some of them don't know how to navigate through a file system, how to save a file, how to zip a file. But creating a curriculum of self-guided tutorials for them to go through has proven to be very useful. It has to be asynchronous at some level because these students don't necessarily have the time structures for synchronous education, or even the bandwidth for that matter, the online bandwidth as well. But we've seen that students from lower tech literacy backgrounds are able to get there pretty quickly when put through the right paces. We teach also in the Digital Culture Summer Institute, middle schoolers and high schoolers, and it's the same thing there. If you clearly outline pathways, the tools have gotten to a point where things are more intuitive. You don't need deep levels of tech literacy in order to learn things. You don't need to press F1 and go through the help files like you used to. And you can already start to create very intuitively. And I think that's a message that has been coming through to the tech community as well, is making things as intuitive and easy to pick up as possible, because we need to be respectful of the idea that not everyone comes into this with history of using computers every day. So I think it's a fantastic question. I'm sure other panelists have other thoughts on this.
I just add, it's certainly a challenge from the development perspective to think about the dichotomies of how do you be inclusive given where we're at in the ecosystem in terms of access to hardware, access to quality, high bandwidth internet, and different access. So there's this dichotomy between being kind of low fidelity and ease of access, ease to get in, can work on any machine, and okay, how do we really think about the future and things moving into VR headsets and everything in between. So certainly a balance to think about, and one that you try to develop too, but takes a lot of effort, and you need teams working on mobile, on desktop, on the VR headsets, so you're hitting more of the spectrum. It is tough to hit the full spectrum at time, for sure.
If we look at the way the trends have been going, though, things are decreasing in price and increasing in quality in terms of what's affordable for students. We're noticing that regardless of socioeconomic class of the students coming in, almost all of them have smartphones these days, for example, and that definitely wasn't the case just even 10 years ago, I would say. But it's become an indispensable part of life, and that becomes a platform that we can teach to and teach from as well.
So we are at the end of our time. Thank you. I want to say a huge round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for your insights you have generated. There's so much in the chat. I'm going to actually save the chat so we have it. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who served on the panel. Thank you for everyone who participated in the chat. Thank you for all of you for making this an awesome experience. And we look forward to engaging and interacting with you in VirBELA, in Zoom, in Slack, in all of our digital metaverse platforms. So thank you all.